How do you do a building a nation save in Football Manager? What is a building a nation save? Who am I? Who are you? Where am I? All these questions, and many more I've just made up, will be answered in today's video. Well, most of them anyway. Now, if you're familiar with my work in the past, you'll know that building a nation saves are basically my bread and butter. It's my favourite way to enjoy a Football Manager save, and this year, I hope that will be absolutely no different. Spoiler alert, it is different. And I made a guide video about this a couple of years ago, but a lot of things have changed since the start of FM24, and now where we are at the beginning of FM26. Not just the length of my hair. I also made another video midway through the game cycle explaining some of the more hardcore elements of it and how you could get the best out of it. Today's video is going to contain all of those things, but more importantly, what works and what doesn't, as we go into the FM26 game cycle. And believe me, there is a lot of changes. And this video will hopefully serve as a guide to help you navigate those changes, as well as an introduction to the team and nation we'll be using for this year's save. I'll just tell you straight up front, it's Wisła Kraków. We're doing it in Poland. We're finally returning to the first time I think I ever properly did one of these on YouTube, and I have unfinished business. And that of course means it is the stream save, and you can find it live right now over on Twitch. I'll put a link in the description. We go live on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. But that also of course means that the seasonal recaps will be returning to the main channel as well, along with all the other stuff I have planned. That's right, I'm actually back doing YouTube properly now. In the description, you will also find a link to the database we're using for Poland, which I'll explain a little bit more about that later, although there are a lot less changes than there were for Malta, as well as the save file that I'll be using specifically should you want to play along directly in the exact same save world. The one you're seeing on screen right now isn't actually it, this is just a placeholder. So at this point, I should probably explain to the uninitiated what is a building a nation save. The goal is a simple one, but to reach it is very difficult. You want to take your league, and therefore nation, all the way to the top of the European coefficient charts, therefore making it the best league in Europe. And if you hadn't already guessed, this has nothing to do with international football, especially not in FM26. It literally couldn't if it wanted to. But the way that you do that on a macro level is not just as simple as winning a load of Champions Leagues with a team from a smaller nation. That would get you so far, but not particularly far in the grand scheme. The way you get those stretch goals to actually have a chance at challenging for those top spots on the coefficient chart is to improve the entire league as a whole, i.e. the teams around you, get them to have European success, and they then start contributing to these points, and that is how you reach those end goals. Now, I'll talk all about how you actually go about doing that later in the video, but I just want you to know the basics for now. So team successes in Europe, be it winning games, drawing games, progression through rounds and certain stages of the competition, as well as various bonus points, all get added into a team's individual coefficient. All the teams from those nations' points are all pooled together and then divided by the number of teams that nation actually had in Europe that season, which is, as you can see, England have 9, which can be a blessing and a curse. And that number determines how many points that league got over the course of a single calendar year in European competitions. Those numbers decide an order at the start of each year, and that is then used to determine which positions each nation's teams go in the European qualifiers, with the very best nations getting 4 teams straight into the group stage, and the very worst starting down towards the very bottom. The UEFA coefficient system is a little bit like a pyramid scheme, but instead of flogging juice and Tupperware, we get qualification places, and England still keep all the money. In the past, I've done this with Norway and Ireland and Malta and Hungary, and had varying levels of success each time, all the way to second place with Hungary. And last year, I think my best achievement so far was taking Malta, who at the time were even worse than they are now, all the way down here, all the way to second, and we stayed there for such a long time, but couldn't quite beat England. That's going to be a theme. And all the way back in the day, I actually tried this save in Poland, but I didn't know any of the things that I know now about how to do it, and I believe we got them to 5th, even without those tricks. We'll talk about how you pick teams and nations and all that stuff in a minute, but first comes the biggest caveat I could possibly drop on you right now. Can you do this in Football Manager 26? The answer is yes, but with an enormous asterisk currently. Now, obviously, this is a guide video, and FM's never been in more of a state of flux than it is right now. Things that are true one day may not be true the next, but a lot of the logic in this guide should still remain true, and in fact, a lot of the things I talk about will hopefully be fixed, and you should be able to have a better experience than I'm about to. And the biggest thing is that I'm going to tell you straight up, do not start a building a nation save right now on FM26. I would advise you to wait for this specific thing to be fixed before we move any further. I like taking a few risks, and I'm kind of gambling on the fact that Unity should be much more easy to do save game compatible patches on, so I'm just going to go ahead and start my save anyway and, well, take the fall if it goes wrong. But I probably wouldn't recommend you do the same, and this is why. So the first thing is, you know, I'm on the 10th of February 2026 in my Slavia save. This is the coefficient points for the current season that we're in. I'll just show you it on this screen too. Yeah, it's a 0. Because it's just not displaying them, which is clearly like a visual UI bug, that it's just not pulling the data through correctly to this screen. And the reason that we know this is because if you go to the following season, all the data from this season will then show up in the previous season's column. It's like a big reveal at the end. Congratulations, you're average. And were it just that and purely visual, I would say, you know what, crack on. That will get patched out nice and easy. It's the other problem, because as it turns out, the number it does show you the following year isn't calculated correctly either, because there's a wonderful post on the SI forums that goes through exactly how it is wrong and why it needs to change. And that is the most crucial thing, because that means in those first couple couple of seasons, essentially, it's going to most likely be calculating the wrong information, and you don't want that. Now, I'm willing to start in the hope that they do fix it and it works from then on, and it will be absolutely fine, because in the first couple of seasons, it's not likely to make much difference anyway, because I'm going to be doing my own thing in the second tier of Poland, so I'm not going to have much of an impact on the European heights. But it's still very annoying, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. So just bear that in mind if you do decide to start a save now. Personally, I'd wait for another patch where hopefully this is all sorted out. So now that we've got the negative stuff out of the way, let's focus on the positives of how we actually do this save, what's changed, and how you can have the most fun when this actually is going to work properly. Now, because of some of the best practices that I like to use in these types of saves, you really want to be picking a league that has relatively relaxed rules on foreign players. For example, in Hungary or Ireland or Austria, there's quite a few that you can choose from. So I would definitely advise when choosing a country to have a little look in the rules of that league before you do anything else. The last thing you want is to have chosen the perfect nation to do this in, get into the rules and find that you can't register players if they were born 2 towns over, right? It can be that strict sometimes. But this is why I like Poland so much, because the rules are relatively relaxed. Second tier is a little bit more harsh, but you don't expect to be in that league that long anyway. The main thing here is that we need 3 players under the age of 22 that were trained at a club in Poland, and obviously you lose sub spots for that, but you can get money if you play loads of them. And we've got a high enough youth rating that I think it should be absolutely fine, particularly as under 21 players can play in all matches, which softens the blow a little bit on the 25-man squad registration rules. So if you are looking for a challenge for this, maybe choose a league with more harsh restrictions, but trust me, it's enough of a challenge as it is. And if you want to make it easier, just choose England. Congrats! You did it. The other thing to think about when choosing a team is to avoid picking one of the dominant sides in that nation, because they can do it by themselves. They're already going to have some decent players, decent reputation, most importantly, which is useful for attracting more players, and most likely doing some stuff on the European scale by themselves, especially when it comes to nations like Poland, where you've actually got some pretty big historical sides in this top flight, and some other sides that are knocking on the door as well. Even more reason for me to stay away from them and go down to the second tier to find my team. That way we're adding someone else that's good to the top table, rather than just stealing someone's seat, which is the exact reason I chose Wisła, because they're a historically massive side in Poland, have won many league titles, and well, they're actually kind of crushing it in the second tier in real life right now after missing out on promotion last year. And of course, the other thing is, if you do have your heart set on a certain nation, don't be afraid to use the editor to change the rules of that league, because at the end of the day, just have a good time. The whole point of a game is it's supposed to be fun. It doesn't matter, it's a single player game. In fact, while we're here, we may as well discuss those exact changes now. The biggest thing that we've added is the loan rules that we stole from Norway, and we use these every year. Players who are loaned out have to be allowed to play against their parent clubs, and it's hard locked. We always put that rule in because it just makes it more difficult when you're playing against a load of insane players that you've loaned out to other teams in your league. And a little tweak to turn on the Poland women's leagues and add Wisła into a playable league so we can keep an eye on them as well, but that's just for fun and context. The only other change I can think of is a change to the transfer preferences of Poland as a nation on the whole. The idea being it will make clubs want to sign players from a little bit more eclectic places. That way when you get further into the save, they're not still trying to sign from all the nations around them, and they're actually spreading their wings a little bit more. I'll obviously dump all this stuff down in the description so you can download all of it, including views and stuff I'm going to show you in a minute. You've done that, and now you're ready to go. So what are the best practices you can engage in to help build a nation? The first and most important thing is, do not weaken your league. Once you get to a certain stage and you're in Europe and stuff, try to avoid at all costs signing players from other teams in your league, because you're going to weaken them by doing that. The only time I'd say that's acceptable is if that player is going to leave the league anyway, and then you can bring them in and loan them back to them for 2 years. Most of the time, you want to be bringing players into the league rather than cannibalizing what's already there. It's a bit like eating your own internal organs because there's protein, you know? Like, it's technically true, but is that a good strategy for long-term growth? But the biggest thing you can do is the loan farm. It is truly the beating heart of a building a nation save for me, and don't worry, it's still possible in FM26. There's just a few little tweaks. And the last thing to say on this is not a short-term save. You're not going to do this in 5 years, unless you choose England. You can do it in 1. It's going to take you a while. You're talking decades. Most of these saves I do here take 25, 30 years. I believe Poland could definitely be done in that time, and we may actually be able to achieve the goal, but we'll have to see. Just because they get a leg up at actually starting 15th, which is probably the highest I've started since I last did Poland. So now you know the prerequisites, but it is now time to dwell on the biggest thing of all, the loan farm. And now I have coffee, which is just even better. So the loan farm in principle should be a very obvious concept. Essentially, you want to create a massive army of players that you have out on loan to other clubs in your league. That way you can strengthen them and also develop some lovely footballers. But it isn't just about you hoarding talent around the world, although that is part of the fun because it means you get to do even more scouting than normal. It's about trying to improve the other teams in your nation with players that they may not have had access to were they to be scouting by themselves or trying to recruit personally. The basic logic flow is this. We take a player who we've signed who appears to have high potential ability, but relatively low CA. We managed to find him a loan to another team in our league. He's then out there for several years developing, and after a while becomes a very good player for that club. They then at that point have access to a player that is much better than they could have reasonably signed themselves. But this is where the snowball effect goes. As you do that more and more at the same teams, their squad level gets better, and therefore they are able to sign better players themselves over time, and it just snowballs into something brilliant. Meanwhile, you get to keep players out on loan for an absurd amount of time. This is just one example of a guy that we had out on loan on the last save, because it's easier to show you like this. you can see that he had several different loan spells across Malta to I think 3 or 4 different teams before finally settling at Birkirkara. But also you can get genuine worldies to still go out on loan like this chap here. He's been on loan for the last 5 years at Hamrun, and you can see the player he's developed into because of that loan spell, and yet he's been happy to stay out on loan. They would have never signed a guy like this otherwise, and that's why it's important. And one of the questions I get quite a lot is, when should I start doing this? As soon as possible. This is literally day 1 of a Viswa save right now that I'm in. You'll notice that there's a load of players that are suggested that we can try and get out on loan. Basically, just start building those connections as soon as you can, and when new players join you that you know aren't going to be ready for your first team but look to have high PA, get them straight out offered for loan. So that's what the loan farm is, but how do you find players for it? In the early days, basically anybody will do, and you're not going to be worrying about it. Just trying to get as many players out there as you can, just trying to improve some guys. Anyone you sign that's young and looks kind of alright, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it too much. But as you get a few seasons in and things start to improve, you get a little bit more money, there might be a few things you might want to try. And my 2 favourite tricks to get really solid, cheap players that you can use for other teams in your league is the Belgian amateur trick and the Brazilian freebies, because both of these things still work in 26. So these will work a lot better if you're using my optimal database setup. I made a video about that, I'll link that in the description as well, but you may have already seen it. This will definitely help with this type of thing. And obviously it takes a few years for these to start kicking in. I'm not going to go into the full scope of these because that's not really what this video is about. I'm going to make a scouting video soon, but this is a little taste of that. So Brazilian freebies, basically all you want to do is set for players in Brazil between the ages of, well, 15, 18 or whatever, and transfer value is at most 0. But either way, you're looking for players that are young, free, and have played loads of games. Now, you'll know nothing about these guys at all, but I would just look at anybody, especially if they're slightly younger on here, like these 17-year-old guys that have played a load of games. Just whack them in your shortlist, scout them, see if you can find anything crazy. They'll be free anyway. The other one I like, and the same logic applies here, is the Belgian amateur method, which I find really works best between seasons 3 and 6 of a save. For some reason, the teams in Belgium just always seem to produce these crazy good players. So players based in Belgium, same age brackets, and then contract status is amateur. The game still seems to generate some crazy good talent at the amateur level in Belgium to pump up some of their youth national teams for whatever reason, and it still seems to work, at least up until about season 6. And yeah, follow the same logic. Just have a look at some of these guys that have played a load and get some scout reports. Other thing about this is you can change this nation to loads of different options. Croatia, Denmark, Colombia. There's loads of nations this works with, but you'll also notice some there'll be 0 players. Out of interest, with all the things I'm telling you to download, they need to go in very specific folders. So the data for the editing stuff needs to go in the editor data folder. The save file needs to go in the games folder. Any views that I show you and that you download need to go in the views folder. Any filters I give you, they won't do anything. No amount of creating the folder is going to help us today. You've now signed loads of players, you're ready to actually get them out on loan and then keep them there. How do you do that? Well, the first thing you would have done in the past is use the development list. Unfortunately, that is absent in FM26. But crucially, the options that you set in the dev list do still exist in the offer out screen. And you're probably wondering where that is. And to be honest, it's moved twice since I started writing this video. So honestly, in the latest patch, I could have put it on the wall behind you. So do maybe check that as well. But in the current state, you go into club and into responsibilities, which is where you would delegate stuff. But in that, you then go into staff advice and reports. That's where it is now. Except it isn't until you click customize advice and then go into offer via transfer room, and this should bring you back all those settings you're familiar with from previous saves. But it's the development loans that we're looking for. You can set them on the senior squad and the others will just follow. I'll show you how though. I tend not to tick these and I tend to mostly leave this as unspecified. As for playing time, it's the same thing. I'll decide that. Obviously set this to your league any, facilities lowest as possible because you don't want to exclude any teams, and obviously add them to the loan list as well. Then when you're happy with that, go into the under 23 squad, use first team settings, and the same with your under 19 squad. That now means when you offer out a player for loan, they will use these settings in theory. So while the dev list is gone, there are still workarounds. Now in the past, I would manually offer players out when they first joined because you'd go into transfer and you'd get offer via transfer room. However, now when you try to offer them out through this, the target options are slightly different to what they were before. You used to be able to do a thing where you could actually propose it into your own nation here, which has now seemingly been removed off this screen. Now you can still exclude overseas clubs, but I found that that was less effective. That might be the only method forward in 26 to be fair, so we may have to give that a go. But generally, I wouldn't worry too much about this anyway, because crucially, you'll want a view like this. Now, I'll make one similar to this that I'll actually let you guys export that you can manage your loans with. But basically, you want to just be looking for any player that you've got listed for loan, which is obviously, in my case, quite a lot. Excuse the fact it takes a while for them to load in. If you saw how many there were, you'd understand. The other downside is there doesn't appear to be an expanded player status column anymore, so you have to rely on these ones that are packed in. Before, you could have one that was bigger. I don't know if it's actually expanding it makes any difference. No. There used to be one that would show them all, so you could see people who were wanted, and it was much easier to find out loans for stuff. But instead, you're just going to want to select every single player that you've got listed for loan, or just a little bunch of them, right click on them, just had to deselect a few whose contracts are expiring soon, but you can offer them via transfer room for loan. and it will just do that. And in theory, it should use the settings you just set on that other screen. In addition, I find it sometimes good to, even if they don't get any offers immediately, is to offer them out a second time, as sometimes the first one just drums up the interest. And I find doing it on the 24th of May and the 24th of December seems to give you some better results for whatever reason. I assume it's because teams are doing prep for the summer windows and the winter windows, so they're doing that initial scouting, and it seems to just fall into their radar nicely. Something else you can also do, which is really useful, is if you do have any other players that you're just struggling to get rid of, send them to an affiliate club if you've got one in a lower division. You can do that by, again, selecting a load of players. Sometimes it will have a random player in there that will not let you do this. It's really tough to isolate who. I find sorting by first listed and then their contract expiry date certainly helps, but if a player's involved in anything else, you may have to sort of fiddle around so you can get rid. But in this case, I can offer them to move to an affiliate. Like, for example, Zuri, who play in our league. Most of them, if they've got anything about them, will say no, but you'll still get a few more out doing it this way, and they can potentially help out those clubs. It's just to get a few more players out. The only other way, if all of that fails, I've found as a good way of getting players to loans, is part exchanging. So you'll see here, this fella, Oscar Crisanto, is currently wanted by clubs in Malta. And now that we know that information, we can now go to Goodyear and then go into their under-19 squad, pick a random player, make an offer, always pick a guy that they say something like this about not having a future at the club or whatever. Then we just go into here, players to exchange. You should see that either it will show them in here, my god, that's loads of them, or players they've shown an interest in the past. There it is, Oscar Crisanto. This works largely the same as it did in 24, except for one crucial thing. The thing you set in here doesn't actually show what you've clicked after you've clicked it. So you will need to go in here and make sure that you select end of next season for a 2-year loan. However, if you do more than one player in these, they will definitely accept for the most part, but even if you select the right box, you will find that sometimes it's just a 1-year loan for absolutely no reason. Let's just see if they accept this. Technically, you can do up to 5. I reckon 3 is about the max, but I honestly think that this year it's better to do them 1 by 1, because that way you can guarantee that you get the 2-year loan. I tried one with 3 yesterday, and I thought I'd set them all, but then only one of them got a 2-year loan. Point is, it's still a good method, and you should still find some value in it, but be careful when you do these loans, because you don't get to choose the wages that the other team are paying, and sometimes they'll pay you a little bit too much, and it could put them in financial trouble. So make sure when the loan comes up for extension, you take all the money out of it. So you've got loads of players out on loan now. The question is, how do you keep them there? So the reason I'm doing a lot of these examples on Sirens is because it's an existing save, and I can show you what endgame situations look like in a bit more of an exaggerated way. Now, what we used to do on FM24 and more recent games was a thing called the 2-year loan glitch, which meant that on the 2nd of June, we could offer players for a proposed loan extension on this screen, or one that looked a lot better than this, and then they would get a 2-year loan because it would default to the end of next season, but it would somehow think we were in the new season already, so it would default to 2 years instead. Even though on the negotiations, it would say that the loan would finish next season. And that nearly caught me out to the point where I've had to re-record an entire section because I realised I was wrong. Learn from your mistakes, friends. If I hadn't have noticed that, we could have been in for a world of hurt. So, about this screen. This may look on the face of things like an absolute mess, and I agree. From a visual standpoint, it absolutely is. The fact that it takes up so little of the screen, this thing takes up most of it, and you can only see 3 players at a time. None of these columns are editable, and none of the information is especially useful. The fact that I can't add things like how many games they've played for that team, their CA and PA, without actually clicking on individual profiles like this, it's silly. You need to be able to customize this more and show more players. However, that's just a complaint about the UI. The actual functionality of this screen is way, way better than it was in 24, because in order to propose the loan extension in 24, you'd have to find the player, click on the player, right-click on the player. Sometimes I used to do both just so I knew who I was up to, because there's a lot of players. Then you'd have to go transfer, propose loan extension, yes, onto the next one. With this one, literally, it's 1 click. And obviously you've got to go to other players, so once you find that one, it's 2 clicks. And you can just click, 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 scroll, click, scroll, and so on all the way down there. I think I managed to do all 41 of these guys in like a minute and a half, maybe at max. So extending loans is actually easier in 26 than it was prior. The first time you extend one, you will have to like set don't show again, otherwise that thing will keep popping up. But you'll also note that this is the 1st of June I'm doing this on. And that's because when I was under the impression that the 2-year glitch had been patched out of the game, I was trying to find the optimal time to get the most amount of loan acceptance. And basically what I've come to the conclusion with that is as soon as possible. Midnight on the 1st of June is the first time that you're going to be allowed to do these extensions. The proposed loan extension button will not pop up until that day. But the closer you get to the loan expiry date, the more likely the team are to reject your proposed loan extension offer. That seems to be my experience with it. So if you wait a week and a half, 50% of them will probably reject rather than like 5% at a push. And if you wait till very close to the loan extension date, it'll be almost all of them. And I think the reason for that is because the AI clubs haven't done a lot of squad building yet, but their windows and their ability to do so has just essentially opened up to them. So they're more likely to take these loan extensions to keep their squads together. But that then begs the question, why am I doing all these extensions on the 1st of June instead of the 2nd? Because I wanted to see if that 2-year loan glitch might now work on multiple different days. And therefore, doing it on the 1st of June at midnight would be the best possible time to do that, given that it would give us the most chance of actually getting the loans accepted in the first place. So you see here that a lot of these teams were interested in extending these players' loans, way more than would have been if we'd done this later. Also, what I do kind of like here, because you can just set it to unread, hit accept, and just start walking forward back between the 2 loans. But the crucial part is if you were to go into the actual offer itself, you'll see it says end of next season. But then you look down here, and it says the loan is due to end on June 2055. Nope, that is 1 year away from now. Well, a year and a bit. And this is what caught me, because I forgot about this. This is wrong. I just want to show you an example on this guy, Hosu Garcia, who's going to Sengleia. 2055, June, end of next season. Watch what happens when we now go to this being accepted. No, I didn't accept all of them for the purposes of this, but you'll see if we go to his profile now we go to his contract, you'll see loan club expires in 2 years, 27 days. So he's now got a 25-month loan extension because of that. So even though it says 2055, it means 2056. So it does still work, and you can now do it on the 1st of June at midnight and get the best possible amount of players back out on loan again. So it's even better in 26. Boy, am I glad I spotted that. You'll also note that the loan counter bug here is finally fixed, and it no longer displays a negative number when you go over 128 loans. I feel like that was just for me. So all in all, other than the gopping UI of this particular screen, I would say a net win. Now, there used to be a thing you could do on the 1st of May and the 1st of December where you could offer all of the players that you currently have out on loan to their clubs for a permanent transfer. I found that to be completely ineffectual on 26. You don't get a single bid on the players, in my experience. Now, that could change. Now, of course, again, because I'm using an imported save, that could make some things a bit different, but I don't think it affects the underlying mechanic. So I wouldn't even bother with that. Honestly, I'd say in a situation like that, you'd be better off just using the transfer room out things to look for interest from clubs in your league like these guys here right now. And speaking of this screen, when I first saw that this was a possibility and that it was a thing that was in the game, I got very excited. And now I'm not so sure, because firstly, the fact that you can't filter it to show different leagues is very annoying, because it means that you get this filled with teams that you're not interested in loaning players to. But in addition, I'm not entirely sure how it's populating this screen. There's one of two things happening. And the reason I say this is because every single player I've ever seen show up on the loan wanted for loan screen here, when you actually go to that player that matches their requirements, you'll see that that club is already interested in that player for loan. So they already have an active interest in your player. Now, what this means could either be good or just On the positive side of things, it might mean that with the introduction of this new screen, it's actually drumming up more interest in your players for loans in order to give this screen something to do and to actually populate it with something, and thus the wanted symbol is just a byproduct of that. However, there is always the opposite way around of that, where in fact all it's doing is taking interest that's already existing in your players and adding them to a different screen and not actually adding anything new that you wouldn't already know about before. That's the less charitable interpretation of it. I really hope it's the first one and it's actually generating more interest and not just copying interest that's already there onto a different screen. And even if it is, I guess that at least sort of isolates it onto one screen for easier browsing, but I would hate if that was the case. So I realize this video has possibly been quite a long one, but I wanted to try to make sure I got all the information out there as best I could, and I even discovered some things along the way that stopped me from making a fool of myself. It didn't stop me, I mean, let's be honest. But in answer to the big question, can a building a nation save be done on Football Manager 26? The answer is yes. You just have to be very careful and hope for some patches that fix the actual coefficient stuff in the first place. But either way, hopefully this video has been helpful. If you do have any more questions, either drop them in the comments or come over to the stream where we're streaming it right now, and you can ask me there and I'll do my best to explain it. So yes, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Hold your gun. Capybara. Bye-bye.